What's up, Psychedelic Investors? My name's James, and you're watching The Psychedelic Investor, your number one news source for psychedelic stocks and everything MindMed. In today's episode, we'll be covering MindMed's updated investors deck, which they gave us in the new year. And this will be a very important video as there are lots of changes to the timelines of almost all of MindMed's clinical trials, some for the better and some for the worse. As anyone who watches this channel knows, clinical trial process and success is the most important factor in deciding whether MindMed or any other psychedelic medicines company is a good investment. So knowledge of the updated timelines is essential to all current and potential MindMed shareholders. In MindMed's new investors deck, they update the timelines for all their main projects. This includes Project Lucy, which will be entering a phase 2b trial studying the effectiveness of LSD-assisted psychotherapy to treat anxiety, Project Layla, which is set to begin a phase 2a trial testing the effectiveness of 18-MC in treating opioid addiction, their LSD microdosing to treat adult ADHD phase 2a trial, and their phase 2a trial testing an LSD treatment for suicide headaches. Here, some have been moved up, some have been pushed back, and knowledge of when these trials start, when they are completed, and when we can expect data to be released is the number one responsibilities of investors at the moment. As we discussed in our 2021 Catalysts video, these dates, now updated, are the most important for confirming the MindMed investment thesis, which is basically that psychedelic medicines will disrupt the pharmaceuticals industry worth hundreds of billions of dollars, and that MindMed will lead the charge. Also important to note is they have rejigged the dates for various phase 1 trials. On top of this, the company has added slides for newer projects like Albert, which is their digital medicines division, and for their new LSD microdosing study. Furthermore, throughout the deck, MindMed has updated data points for various stats like the market sizes for various treatments for various maladies. So, in this video, we're going to cover all the timeline changes to MindMed's projects, big and small. We will also discuss the slides they have added as well as the changes to the stats they have presented. And finally, we will end with a discussion in the speculation zone for what this all means. Lots of things got pushed back or delayed, so we'll need to be frank with what the consequences are for the long-term success of MindMed. But first, if you enjoy this video and find it entertaining and informative, invest in the channel with your like and subscribe. Over time, you'll see your investment grow as we continue to bring you the information that you need to know before investing in the psychedelic medicines field. And if you're feeling extra generous, leave us a comment telling us your thoughts on MindMed's updated investors deck. Are you disappointed about the delays, or are you taking them in stride as a natural occurrence for a small biotech startup like MindMed? Do you think that when combined with all the new projects MindMed has added, it was inevitable that the other programs got delayed by a couple of quarters? Let us know. Enjoy the video. Start, we're going to be looking at the new timelines for MindMed's 4 phase 2 trials, which are, again, the most important factors that we as shareholders and potential investors need to be cognizant of. First up, we have Project Lucy, their program using LSD-enhanced psychotherapy to treat anxiety. Here, the main takeaway should be that the company is progressing as planned with a few small hiccups. We will start with this chart on page 12 of the investors deck, which used to be on page 3. We can see that the first part of the information they gave on Project Lucy has been changed from finishing phase 2A in Q1 of 2021 and preparing FDA IND submission to phase 2B trial, estimated study start Q4 2021, and preparing to open the IND with phase 2B trial Q3 2021. So we can see here that this flagship project appears to be progressing as it should. However, if you scroll down to page 22, which used to be page 21, you can see that their goal of filing their investigational new drug application, or IND, with the FDA has been pushed back by 1 quarter, from Q2 of 2021 to Q3 of 2021. So, to me, this really isn't that big of a deal. Earlier this year, they completed the pre-IND meeting with the FDA, which by all accounts went well. So they're pushing back doing the paperwork by a quarter doesn't really bother me too much. What is important is that we now know when their phase 2B trial will begin, which is Q4 of this year. Given the nature of biotech startups, we should expect delays here and there, and as long as it's not being pushed back indefinitely, we shouldn't be too worried by these. Plus, who knows if this delay was caused on on MindMed's end or on the FDA's. Remember, we are still in the middle of a global crisis, and dealing with this will inevitably cause delays. The FDA is probably devoting infinitely more resources to corona-related problems, which may explain in part the delay. What is more worrying to me is that on the same slide we can see that MindMed has removed the note saying a readout is expected for Q1 of this year. I was very excited to get some data on the phase 2A trial for treating anxiety with LSD therapy, but now it appears that we won't be getting this quarter. I would caution not to read too much into this at the moment, as I do not really know what it means. It's possible that it was just delayed by a quarter or two, which would not be that big of a deal, though it doesn't give a new date in the deck. It does frustrate me a little bit because it was the event I was looking forward to the most this quarter, and now mention of it has disappeared, but again, we have to keep a level head. We don't know why it was removed. Is it just delayed and they are picking a new date now so they didn't put it into the deck? Have they decided it was best not to do a readout until after the phase 2B trials have been completed, or was there a mistake in updating the deck? We did send an email to MindMed back in January asking about this, though we haven't received a response yet. We're following up and we'll give you an update when we hear something. So, we'll definitely keep an eye on this situation as it develops, as it is a fly in the ointment. Overall, it is very good news that MindMed is progressing Project Lucy into Phase 2B, but I wish I knew what happened to this Q1 readout. If anyone has some insight into this, please let me know down in the comments. If this gets resolved, we'll quickly make a short follow-up video on the situation, as it is the most critical question raised by the new investors deck. But again, I do want to stress that this isn't cause for panic. The overall news on Project Lucy is very positive. Okay, next up we have updates to Project Layla, which is their program to treat opioid addiction with 18-MC, a non-hallucinogenic proprietary derivative of ibogaine, and their LSD microdosing to treat ADHD study. Going back to the chart on page 12, previously on page 3, we can see that the big headline is that both the phase 2A clinical trial start dates have been postponed by 3 quarters. For both 18-MC and LSD microdosing to treat ADHD, it used to say that the trials were starting in Q4 of 2020, but now they have been pushed back to Q3 of 2021. So, this is a delay, there's no way around that. But the reasons behind the postponements are more important than the delays themselves, which make it clear that they are not a cause for alarm. For the 18-MC trial, the reason behind the delay is the expansion of their Phase 1 trials. After finishing what they originally set out to do in Phase 1 in December, on time, rather than move on to Phase 2A right away, the company decided to gather higher dosing data. So now the Phase 1 trial is expected to be complete at the end of April, which will of course push back the start date of their Phase 2A trial. So yes, the delay sucks of course. But gathering more dosing data in Phase 1, hopefully that will mean that Phase 2A is more effective. I actually wish that MindMed explained this in the investors deck, because on first glance it seemed like something negative happened and they were falling behind their timelines, but upon a little investigation it became clear that this was not the case. If anything, their expansion of the Phase 1 trial causing the delay in their Phase 2A trial is good news, as we will have more data on the safety of 18-MC given at various doses. And, as for the microdosing, as I reported earlier, MindMed recently expanded their LSD microdosing division as well, adding a new study. Though I can't find the specific reason for why this specific trial was delayed, I assume that like with the 18-MC trial, the expansion of the microdosing trials most likely played a role. So again, what looks like a disappointment on the face of things is actually more complex when we dig down into it. Having more data at the Phase 1 stage is good before moving on to Phase 2. And as my dad always says, it's better to do things right than it is to do them quickly. So again, when it comes to the 3-quarter delay of the start date for the 2 Phase 2A trials looking at treating addiction with 18-MC and ADHD with LSD microdoses, yeah, it sucks for impatient people like me. But in the long run, it shouldn't be anything to worry about. Next up, we have MindMed's Phase 2A trial looking at treating cluster headaches, also known as suicide headaches because of how painful they are, with LSD. And here, we've got some good news. On the chart on page 16, previously page 29, you can see that MindMed moved up the estimated end date of this trial from Q1 2024 to Q4 2022. So, this is an acceleration of more than a year. And I'm not really sure what could have caused this, but it is exciting nevertheless. And even more exciting, if you look at slide 34, you'll see they have added a note about expecting a readout of this trial in Q4 2022. So yes, that is a long way away, but it still makes me happy. So to recap the updated timelines for MindMed's 4 phase 2 clinical trials, Project Lucy treating anxiety with LSD-assisted therapy is more or less on schedule, with phase 2b trials set to start in Q4 of this year. Yes, the start date was delayed by a couple months, but that is nothing to worry about, and what is important is the trial is set to start. The only fly in the ointment here is that MindMed removed mention of a readout happening in Q1 of 2021, and we don't know when that is set to happen. For 18MC to treat addiction and LSD microdoses to treat ADHD, the start dates for both phase 2A trials have been delayed by 3 quarters to Q3 2021, though in both cases this appears to be due to the company expanding their phase 1 trials to gather more data. So again, the delay seems to be justified and should not be a cause for worry. And finally, their phase 2A trial treating cluster headaches with LSD has been accelerated, and it is now set to finish at the end of 2022, more than a year early. We'll have more discussion on the implications at the end of this video, but for now, I would say that when it comes to their big flagship projects, MindMed is progressing well and investors should be happy. Though, of course, nothing is certain until we start seeing some data. Okay, moving on to the rest of the changes in the investors deck. As well as updating their 4 flagship programs, MindMed also added some slides for newer projects. First off, on page 33, we see they added a slide for their new LSD microdosing study. As we have covered before, this new study is not attempting to treat or cure a specific disease, but rather test the effects of small doses of LSD in healthy populations. The variables they will be measuring are BDNF plasma levels, mood, sleep measures, cognitive performance, quality of life, and immune system response. They will be gathering some of this data using their digital medicines techniques, which brings us to the next new slide on page 13, which is on Albert, MindMed's newly formed digital medicines division. Basically, Albert is MindMed's way of beginning to integrate AI into their business. I'm not exactly sure of the specifics of what Albert will be doing, but in general, the use of AI will greatly cut costs in healthcare, so there is a lot of potential for MindMed here. And for Albert, let's take a quick moment to listen to what CEO J.R. Ron had to say about Albert in a recent interview for the Context 365 event.
In some of these trials, especially with mental health. Can you speak to that and some of the things that you're learning along the way?
Yeah, so let me just briefly touch on how clinical trials work at the FDA, because there are important guardrails to measure both 2 things, safety and efficacy. It's a big component. It doesn't matter if it just works, it's got to be safe too inside the human body. As we look at mental health and behavioral health, it's you're right. I mean, doing a depression trial or an anxiety trial are difficult endpoints to measure for. So one of the things that we as a company are looking at, we just launched a new division called Albert, which is our digital therapeutics platform that we're building out, is how do we integrate digital therapeutics and measurements, both into real world settings and eventually into clinical trials, so that we can track data better. And apply some machine learning to it. We're looking to bring in some leading machine learning experts in the industry. And that is ultimately how I think you get to a more efficient clinical trial pathway. Clinical trials and their designs have been around for a number of years. There hasn't been massive advancements on how you conduct them. I think that the digital side and digital measurements are going to vastly improve on how we can measure efficacy, both during a clinical trial and at years into the launch of a therapy or drug. These are important things to account for.
So this is very cool. Again, I'm not 100% sure on the specifics of what MindMed is doing with Albert, but it will be something to keep an eye on. Another change came on page 17, where MindMed pushed back the start date of their phase 1 trial combining LSD and MDMA by 1 month. Previously, it was set to start in Q4 of last year, and now it got moved to Q1 of this year, and the trial actually has been launched, so the delay there is pretty insignificant. And finally, throughout the deck, MindMed updated some statistics. Most importantly, on page 39, MindMed updates us on the total amount of capital raised, which went from $40 million USD to $187 million USD. This just shows us that MindMed has the funding necessary to run and complete their clinical trials. This process is extremely expensive, and it requires hiring dozens if not hundreds of highly paid experts and purchasing expensive lab equipment. Without tens of millions of dollars of capital raised, no company in this space will be able to survive long term. So again, this number, $187 million, is a fantastic sign. Moving on, they have also increased the market sizes for their drugs. On page 8, we can see in this chart that MindMed raised the estimated market for anxiety slightly from $4.5 to $4.7 billion. ADHD saw a similar rise from $9.1 to $9.5 billion. And depression's market cap saw a huge jump from $4 billion to $9.6 billion. And I would guess that these increases are due to the mental health toll of corona, which is devastating the lives of millions of people. Either way, even without the increase, this just goes to show how large the potential markets for MindMed really are. There are other stat changes in the stock also, but none of the others are super important, so I think I will leave it at that and enter into some discussion, for which we will enter the speculation zone. Reminder that what is said in the speculation zone is just that, speculation. I am using the information I just gave you and forming my own opinions around it. If you believe me to be wrong, let me know why in the comments. So first off, my initial reaction was that almost all of MindMed's projects have been delayed by a quarter or 3, with the exception of their LSD to treat suicide headaches trial. And I'm not gonna lie, when I first saw this, I did have a worried feeling in my gut. But as I said earlier, upon further research, it appears that the 2 big delays, the 3-quarter delays for the start times of their phase 2A trials for 18MC and LSD microdosing, appear to be justified. If anything, MindMed's expanding their phase 1 trials to gather more data will be a long-term benefit to the company. Most of the other delays have been very minor and reasonable. Again, we're in a global crisis, so delays are to be expected, and it doesn't really matter if MindMed begins their trials this month or next, as long as they get started. The only thing in this updated investors deck which does give me a pause is the removal of a readout in quarter 1 of this year for the phase 2A LSD-assisted therapy clinical trial. This was going to be the date that we got our first good look at how well the trial was going and whether or not the therapy was effective. If I had to guess, I would assume that it has just been postponed and we will see this reappear in the future. But it does frustrate me a little bit. Again, if anybody has any insight in this, please comment below with what is happening there. On the flip side though, the big takeaway for investors should be that MindMed is progressing as it should. Yes, there have been some delays, but nothing is serious. The company is continuing its march towards revolutionizing mental health care. I would say that I am equally excited now as I was before reading and internalizing this new investors deck, meaning nothing in it really made me view the company in a different lens. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to like and subscribe to please the YouTube gods and receive internet karma. And if you want to learn more, check out the videos you see on your screen. This is James from the Psychedelic Investor, signing out. I'll see you next time.